Good afternoon, everybody. We are moving into our next session in this on track 2, which is on aligning the funding. And we have some fascinating speakers for you. At last year's inaugural Games Education conference, we were looking at the gap between industry and academia and finding ways to bridge it. And among some of the more fiery debates, we heard clear industry demands for graduates with the skills and techniques to match the very latest video games production studio. And this contrasted with some perspectives from educators who responded that being that nimble and agile and changing direction quickly to suit the very latest requirements from studios was difficult due to just the way that courses are funded and the speed at which universities move, but also that there was an interesting discrepancy between the tendency of the games industry to recruit the cream of the crop, but not all graduates from a course, but the need for universities and indeed colleges to educate all. And so one of the suggestions from the floor, which Lara, I believe you took up on the spot when I put you in the spotlight, so thank you so much for actually following through, was that we bring in some senior stakeholders from universities who run or at least understand the way that education is funded by universities, and as well as an industry figure to talk about the economics of games recruitment and employment. And so I'm delighted to welcome our speakers, and I'm going to hand over to each of you for just a minute to quickly describe, introduce yourself and describe your area of responsibility. I'm going to go round the Zoom call, starting with Nick.
So hi everyone, I'm Nick Duncombe. I'm the head of recruitment at Playground Games, part of Xbox Game Studios. We're based in Royal Leamington Spa. We've got 2 studios there, responsible for the Fable IP and Forza Horizon. We're also one of the biggest game developers now in the UK.
Over to you, Lara.
Okay, hi, my name's Lara Anderson. I'm the Dean of Screen at London College of Communication at University Arts London. And games design and games art come under my purview, but I also collaborate directly with the Dean who's in charge of creative computing on new courses.
And we also have Dr. Adrian Hull.
Hello, so I'm the head of School of Creative Technologies down at the University of Portsmouth. It's a pretty chunky school with about 1,300 students covering lots of areas of the creative technologies, most of which are related in some way to games and games technology. The 2 main games courses, we've got a games enterprise course and a games technology course and a computer animation course, but then also a creative computing course coming online. So you have lots of different courses that are all related to that, but the school covers a whole different area of things. And I'm a composer, so I'm an absolute subject expert on this.
Well, we're looking forward to hearing your insights. So some of the areas that we've been discussing in advance to this session are around the economics of games education, so how and when university degree courses are planned, funded, costed and delivered. We've been looking at the economics of games recruitment, so how games companies searching for talent recruit and from where, and what is the length of their investment in new staff. And I want to talk about the discrepancy between the industry demands for games degree courses to fit current best practice and the ability or indeed willingness of universities to respond to that. And then the duty of care that universities have in ensuring that all students have good chances of employment after graduation, even if some of those graduates find work outside of games. So lots of different subjects to pick up with, and I've asked our panelists to pick 1 or 2 of those and speak for about 5 minutes on that subject. And Nick, because we spoke yesterday, I'm going to throw to you first, if I may.
Sure. So yeah, where do you start, I guess? I mean, the economics of games recruitment's we want the best talent, and we want it sort of fast. Is always the way. We've got a multi-channel approach to where we source normal developers as well as graduate talent. Whether we have, I'm very fortunate with Playground Games that one of my team, Rosie Asquith, her primary role is early careers. So she travels, well, pre-COVID, she does a lot digitally now, was to travel around Europe to the various higher education institutes that we recruit from, give talks, whether that's recruitment talks or whether it's developer talks, and to attract the best talent from Europe and wider afield into Playground, into the UK. So we have Rosie, we've got the talks, we do other things like the UK student conferences, we've got all the uni on-site interviewing that we do. So we'll go in and we'll do mock interviews for the final year students in terms of giving them some experience of an actual interview with a lead developer or a lead artist. And obviously off the back of that, we're looking for some of the better performers that we could then sort of look to continue the interview process further down the line. And then we've always got adverts. It still surprises me how many graduates come through the traditional adverts online on our website and sort of shared across various platforms like ArtStation as well. So those are the various routes in that we have for graduates into our sort of our funnel, I guess. Time is the other thing. We talk about economics, and I think everyone generally thinks about money. For recruitment, it's generally time. I've got myself and Kenny and Rosie, the other members of my team, and it's how we spend our time to attract the best talent in. I mean, this year we've hired, I think so far, about 28 early careers, so sort of graduate level hires, and they're mainly from the UK and Europe. We prioritize where we're hiring them from. So Staffordshire University has been great for engineers for us, along with DigiPen in Bilbao in northern Spain, and Breda, and even Newcastle as well. And then we look on the art side, and then we've hired, I think, 15 early careers artists, a majority from DMU. DMU's been great for us, but also Staffs, Hearts, Escape, BCU, Pole in France, as well as Belcourt in France as well. And then we've got Howest in Belgium too. So we're almost looking each year on where are we hiring our early careers team members from. And if we're going to prioritize our time in years going forward, almost like a gold, silver, bronze type sort of scale, I guess, with higher education, where we're having more success from, we're going to spend more time with. We're going to do more talks. We're going to spend more time doing art tests or art reviews with the students there. And there's more engagement with the lecturers too. And that is, I guess, for my team, that is the main issue. It's time. Where do we spend the time to get the best grads? I mean, that doesn't mean we won't do any talks outside of universities that we haven't hired from, but obviously we need to prioritize where we're getting them from at any one time.
And can I just sort of prompt you on the length of time that you would typically hope to have somebody in your studio? From a standing start from scratch all the way through to maybe a sort of senior role. What's the length of that investment?
So I mean that investment, I mean, up to senior could be something like 4 to 5 years. Up to lead could be sort of eight lead, or principal could be 8 years. So these are long-term investments, and we want to keep that talent within the studio. Attrition, no one wants attrition, and to train them up. We expect the universities to have at a certain level, and then we will spend a lot of time, a lot of investment in terms of getting them up to the standard that we need as a video game developer. So, the longer we can keep them and mold them into those future seniors and leads and principals and tech directors and art directors, the better. But it's a long process, and it's a long investment from our side too.
Brilliant. Thank you. So let's go to Lara about how. Talk us through some of the economics of games education, and how are those constructed, and what are the main concerns that you consider when you might be, for instance, funding a new course?
Yeah, it depends on whether we're talking about a BA or an MA. Those are very different propositions. If we're talking about a BA, we have to remember how young those people are. And it's very difficult in all the disciplines to explain to a student potentially what a games artist does if they've only ever played games. So games design makes sense, but we get a lot of people who apply for games design who really want to do games art, and we have to kind of steer them in that direction. We have the same problem with the other disciplines. People just don't know what a producer does, for instance. People don't know, they don't understand all the various opportunities that exist. And so they very often go for one. The other thing is that students are going to commit financially huge amounts for them financially to pursue their passion. And that's the opportunity that they want in university, as well as the opportunity to get a job. And those are two very difficult things to reconcile sometimes. So it's our responsibility to make sure that they have access to the discipline that they want to pursue, but also that they are given the proper employability skills. So in terms of the economics, if we're talking about a BA level, at the moment, BAs all cost the same. So it's not differential in that regard. Where it does become a financial matter is if you're going to be able to recruit sufficiently to a course in order to enable you to give that course the physical resources that it needs to be able to do the job. So doing really small niche markets and when I say markets, I mean interest from students. If students don't have an interest in that particular area and it's very small, or they're not aware at the school level what the opportunities are, then there aren't that many to go around. So you'll have some of the bigger programs will be quite successful in terms of recruiting programmers or artists or what have you. But in terms of upping the amount of people who are available to go into those fields where there are skills shortages, that might be difficult if students coming into university aren't even aware of those things. Then at the MA level, what's interesting is we have talk about conversion MAs and progression MAs. And conversion MAs are when someone has studied something else completely and they want to do a career change. So you're having to, in a very short period of time, upskill them in an area where an undergraduate would have 3 years to study in that discipline. Then there are progression MAs where there's the assumption that someone already has the skills that would have been required at the BA level, and that they can apply those in more advanced and or more creative ways at the MA level. So that also changes who you're looking for in terms of students and what opportunities they have. With a conversion MA, oftentimes people are just trying to break into the industry. With a progression MA, very often people are interested in being the industry themselves. So for instance, on our MA, we have a lot of graduates who are interested, on our MA in games design, I should say, we have a lot of graduates who are interested specifically in opening their own studios and do that in terms of independent studios and making their own games and going in that direction, which is different from what a BA student would typically want to do. So yeah, I think in terms of the process, as we talked about last year, at least at a big institution like UAL, and I think this is my experience at other universities as well, is that the process of starting a new course takes quite a long time. But that process partially is because there is a lot of consultation with industry. And academic experts who've been delivering at other institutions, and a lot of reflection on what would be appropriate in terms of employability and what skills need to be learned, what makes a complete and well-rounded graduate. So I think that's where some of the frustration from last year came from, is that you have academics who are doing a lot of due diligence with industry, trying to create courses that they know are meeting that demand, or they believe are meeting that demand. And then at the same time, we were hearing from industry that that they felt that there was a shortage of prepared graduates coming out of courses, which is just a challenge that I hope that this conversation can help us. I just hope that we can bring those two sides together a little bit better.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. That's really, really useful insight. Adrian, what about some of those subjects from your perspective?
Well, I'm really sorry I missed the argument last year. It sounds like it was really healthy, actually, because in terms of a good model, universities, we're crying out to work more and more and more with the, in quotes, real world. And that's, and any university that isn't doing that now is, I'm not quite sure where they're going, sort of thing. So it's really refreshing as well, Nick, just to pick up on something you said about something that we acknowledge as well. When you get a graduate from a university, they're not in any way going to be the finished article. University is another stepping stone, just as primary school, secondary school, whatever. It is just a stepping stone. So there's that key acknowledgement, which I really appreciate from you, is that what we've got to try and do is help deliver graduates who are going to go and work in any industry, and from any particular course, they may go off into a number of industries. But we've got to deliver graduates who are hungry to keep learning, actually, for the next 50 years, really. Because and that's almost the number one priority, isn't it, for an employer? You want someone who's passionate, enthusiastic, and who can learn of their own volition. I also, something else you were talking about, Nick, that resonates really well with, I think, how things work in Portsmouth. I'm still relatively new to Portsmouth, having only been there for 18 months or so. But where I was before at UWE Bristol, it was a very similar pattern where, especially with regard to the games teams, so the lecturers and staff involved in games, they're going to be working with local industry, national industry. So at Portsmouth with the Royal Navy, as well as game studios, for example. And then when you get to actually have that kind of work on either innovation projects or research projects, which are actually big chunks of an academic's working life, that informs the curriculum, and then it helps, I think, revise kind of courses and modules and stuff, so that we can help to actually get the graduates, out really, really quickly, who you want, hopefully. I can imagine last year, and this might be completely wrong, so do shout me down if this is the case, but I can imagine some kind of normal lecturers, incredibly passionate. I remember when I was a lecturer, rather than kind of ending up as head of school, a lecturer, it felt like it would take a decade to get a new course off and up and running. No, it doesn't have to be like that, because actually we can create a new module and go through the process in a few weeks if we really want to. So there is that agility, but it has to make business sense, and that's very much not the norm from a university. And the final thing, just to say as a bit of an opening gambit, is I'm not sure how often people remember that universities are charities. We're kind of acting like businesses a little bit, but we're not. We're charities. Universities are charities there to enhance education. And there's an interesting, just even saying that, it's interesting then, how does a charity interlock with business?
Well, I totally sympathise with that, running a charity myself. I wonder if there's something that happens at, particularly at an inaugural event like GamesEd, where really for the first time you had a large group of lecturers having a forum to express some frustration, but also you had a group of industry also willing to express their frustration, and that kind of caused a bit more friction. And I thought it was very healthy, actually. It was a really good way of surfacing some things that had been going on. But I also wonder if, every conversation that I had with industry at the event and following up from it, I found that studios were engaged with universities, they were talking to universities, and in many cases they were helping craft curriculum. But also every time I spoke to almost every university, they were also talking to local industry. And I think sometimes there's that tendency to generalize across the piece, where it doesn't necessarily reflect the huge amount of effort that individual, both companies and institutions actually put into creating courses that are fit for purpose for both the students, but also for the employer. As you said, Lara, about that balance.
Nick, I would ask what fit for purpose means. You know, is fit for purpose, and this is really a question for Nick, the other Nick. We've got two Nicks, that makes it a little complicated.
No, I'm a Rick.
Oh, you're a Rick. I'm sorry, Rick.
Yes, I'm a Rick.
Sorry.
Don't worry.
I know that too.
That's easy.
Yeah. The question being, are we talking about skills shortages? And so that's what, are we only talking about those areas where there are skill shortages? And so it's seen that universities, because we're not focused just on areas of skill shortages, that we're not fulfilling our remit, or is there some other factor going on?
That's a great question, Lara. I think rather than saying skill shortage, it's what we're looking at is a base level skill which we can then take and then finesse further. I think that's the best way to put it. You know, we need our early career staff to be ticking, you know, boxes X, Y, and Z in order for us then take them to the next level. If they are a programmer and they don't have the requisite level of C++ skill, it becomes very, very difficult for us to onboard and get them up without risking failure. And you know, that's no good for the early career starter or for us and our team if that we can't support them and we don't want them to sort of flounder over the first sort of 3 to 6 months. So we have to really factor that in. So you know, this isn't about are those students converse in the latest and greatest software coming out. You know, are they fluent in side effects Houdini, or you know, are they great with Blender or SpeedTree as artists? You know, and there's a whole argument around technical art as the lost sort of career track, which, you know, other than Breda in the Netherlands, a lot of universities aren't looking at, and they've jumped on it very early, sort of, you know, several years ago, and they're in the sort of the #1 spot around that. You know, what we want is, like I said, that base level for engineers and for artists as well. You know, like I said, having that art 101 is something really key, which a lot of universities don't do. You know, we've had interviews with our art director, and you know, he says, well, who's your favorite painter? And yeah, the color drains from interviewing space. It's they'll talk about how much they can use 3ds Max and, you know, and all the latest and greatest. And I've heard from lecturers as well, you know, they you know, the students read industry blogs and they want the latest software and they want to do that, but it's having that solid foundation, as we've spoke about, going from primary to secondary to higher. It's increasing that base knowledge and finessing it as we go up. And we're more than happy to take our share of it at the end as a sort of a finishing school, I guess, to get them up. But you know, we're always learning. You know, new stuff comes out, new techniques. You know, you're learning your whole career. Every day is a school day.
Nick, I was wondering if you could just sort of give a minute or so on what the induction process looks like for a new starter, and how long you might expect to be getting them ready to start working on a live project.
Yeah. I mean, for engineers, I mean, that's a great one with programming. So they'll start on a project, and it's generally an iteration of a very small game that just to get them used to all the different tools that we use. They'll have X amount of weeks to do it, and then they can have help from their peers to get, you know, more integrated with their team. And at the end, there's a review, and it's sort of signed off. And the whole idea is to keep iterating on this game, which actually gets more difficult, as you can imagine, over the years, trying to reiterate on a game that everyone else has sort of worked on within their team. And that's a great way just to get them used to the tools, make sure they're up to speed, and embed them in with the team and that camaraderie within that team. From there, it's identifying training needs with their lead. You know, they've got a 3-month probation just to make sure they get through that. But onwards from there, it's upskilling them from there. And if they went into, say, gameplay, you know, it's all the different teams they interact with, or is it something specific if they're in a tools team, an AI team, a rendering team, you know, and and moving it forward from there, whether it's, you know, they're learning from the GDC Vault or attending SIGGRAPH, etc., or they're attending an Xbox Game Studio internal conference with, you know, our sister studios with Ninja and 343 and the Coalition, etc., and learning from their peers that way. So there's a whole raft. Again, it's a multi-channel approach as to how we go with it. We don't, you know, there is no sort of strict syllabus and modules like you might have in more of a formal higher education. It's, you know, it's having a personal development plan, which the lead works with the early career starter.
Okay, I'm interested to pick up on something you said, Lara, about about choosing courses and getting and picking a new area, or maybe it's a module, as Adrian says, or maybe it's a whole new course. I mean, wouldn't you say it's incumbent on industry to communicate really clearly if it needs to have more graduates with very specific skill sets that aren't being taught, to actually come to you and say, here's what we need, here's how we could work together, here are our requirements, how can you help?
Absolutely. I mean, if industry was, and this does happen, where an industry will come and say, you know, have you considered entering this area? And as long as we have the information and the partnership, and we know that we can find the students for that, then there's no reason why we wouldn't do that. I mean, we do invite, you know, what you said about academics saying that they're working with industry and industry saying that they're working with academics. Every time we don't, not even just the first time we develop a course, but we reapprove them. You know, every institution reapproves them every 3 to 5 years. You know, when we reapprove them, we re-invite industry back in. So, you know, they look at what we're teaching in terms of content, but also skills, the structure, all those things, and they have opportunities to see all the paperwork for the course and feedback and, you know, and all those kind of things. And I think that's where, from the academic point of view, last year, the frustration was coming from, because it's like, you know, I think I heard a lot of academics saying, wait a second, I invited people who I really respect, who are in hiring positions at studios, or who are, you know, leads at studios, to comment on the curriculum I was designing, and then to find out that we didn't do enough, or that it's maybe not what industry wants, is really frustrating. Because everything that we do, I think that might be something that people, back to the idea that Adrian said about us being a charity, everything that we do is because and for the students. Yeah. I mean, that's everybody who is in this building exists for that reason and for their future. And what we're doing is not about business, it's about people's lives, you know? It really matters what we teach them, because it is their life, and they're making a huge investment of their time and of their finances into that. So we need the guidance.
Yeah, and I think this isn't about being reactive to, you know, like I use those examples of some software like Houdini and Blender and that. This isn't about sort of being reactive. I think, you know, if these courses have got the core skills to them. And I think this is one of the other problems. You know, we've got students going from college or from A levels into universities, and I don't always think they know exactly what course they're joining and why they're joining that course. Mm-hmm. You know, having something like a games development foundation year where they get to do a bit of programming, a bit of art, a bit of animation, some lighting, design, and then they can make an informed choice as to what track they want to go on, would make things so much easier. You know, there's a lot of courses out there called game design, which always annoys the industry, because game design for us is something different, whereas they're generally art courses. And they spend 2 years basically as a foundation playing with stuff. And then on their final year, they've got to pick, what are you going to do? I'm going to do animation. Well, now you've got 3 to 6 months to get a world-class portfolio together for a student, in order for, you know, a studio to see that and you know, realize the skill there. And it's tough. And I really feel for the students who've got that. Whereas if they've had a year as a foundation, and I know that's an extra year, and you know, the economics around that could be increased student debt and everything else, which isn't great. You you know, it would give them an opportunity to that, and then they can spend 3 years doing exactly that track, and they'll come out as a, you know, at a really good place to go straight into industry.
So,
Adrian.
yeah, it's quite interesting. So we're starting. Lots of places are doing this, but I'm not. It's interesting. It's not a sales pitch for the university. I think universities now, and this is one of the other things I want to mention, that we're kind of all in this together. I think the whole league table thing, kind of, there's less and less appetite for that anymore. Let's just work as one sector, universities. Anyway, that said, Portsmouth's amazing because we've got a foundation course starting next year in creative technologies, which will cover everything. So the games tech, but also audio, you know, but also things like animation and, you know, the whole spectrum of digital media, all the types of things that could do that, to allow the students an extra year to choose that. Now, that's not right for everybody, but it is right for some people. I don't know if it's possible at the moment, Rick, just to move on to another way of how, and a sort of case study of what we're doing at Portsmouth that I think lots of other places are doing. Like, you know, I'm sure you are as well. We've been really fortunate recently. We've just got some funding. It totals about £5 million to basically buy kit. It's called the Centre for Creative and Immersive XR. And it's around photogrammetry, motion capture, spatial audio, 12 different labs basically in Portsmouth. Now it's interesting because the reason for that is that's been, you know, we've bid for that money from the LEP, the Solent LEP, on the back of partnerships with 30 or so national and regional organisations and international, you know, ones as well. But the point about that is to get the students just a touch of experience in the real world. And I think for me, there are a whole load of reasons for that. But one of them is so that they start getting a sense of what it's like to be professional day one of their new job. I had a great story of someone who started their new job in an audio environment. I don't know how much I can say. I'll say the whole thing. Okay, with BBC, David Attenborough, the graduates sat down on the couch with some famous people at the BBC, quickly got stood up, moved out, and didn't work there again, because they just hadn't learnt at universities the boundaries of what was acceptable professionally and what wasn't. Now, I love the idea that through this kind of big CCIXR thing that's happening at the University of Portsmouth, we might be able to engage with industry more, so that one, the students can find out, get a little look through the telescope into what it might be like in the real world. Two, that we can make sure that what we are doing is relevant to industry. And three, so that they can have some fun and play. Because in industry, it's a business and you've got to make money to keep afloat, haven't you? Whereas university is one of those few times where we can encourage creativity and playfulness. That's one of those embedded skills that I bet everybody in industry really wants graduates to have. It was a bit waffling, but it's a kind of whole topic area.
No, I mean, it's really interesting. And I guess how can industry engage with educational institutions in order to make that happen? I mean, the traditional way obviously is internships, but there will never be a way for industry to provide placements for all the students, given just the volume of students that are enrolling in all of the different courses, just at higher education level, let alone the level below that. And so I guess, I mean, it would be great to trigger a debate on the Discord channel, and I'm sure there'll be other sessions which will have been investigating this, as to how you get that kind of real world experience to more than just the brightest of in a particular cohort whose portfolio looks fantastic and who meets the requirement for a studio for a 3-month placement in the summer.
I think the thing with that, sorry to hijack, I'll zip it after this, but I think the model for CCIXR down in Solent at Portsmouth is that we will have equipment that industry doesn't have. It's on a par with what's at MIT, for example. There's nothing else like it at the moment in the UK or Europe. So we're actually able to maybe, hopefully, offer something to industry that gives them a real call to want to knock on the door. But not just industry, other universities. So it becomes a real hub in a sense. So it's an ever so slightly different model, isn't it? It's tweaking what a charity, a university, can offer to industry. It'll be interesting to see how that progresses.
Nick, what about? I mean, I'm wary of going into the internship sort of debate, but I mean, I think it is the traditional kind of bridging the gap sort of mechanism to give some real world experience. I mean, how often do you do that as a studio, and what ways could we find to get that experience to more people?
So, I mean, we're a studio of circa 250, to give you some sort of idea of scale. We have a placement scheme with our engineering team. We take 4 placement students on each year. They're generally students who've completed their second year, and it's the traditional sandwich year as it was in my sort of day, before they go back and do their final year. That's not always the case. I think it's been the case every year now. We've had a student from Breda in the Netherlands, and we talked about this last year. The European model is they do their placements at the end of the course. So they do their 3 years, then on their 4th year, they do their placement, and then from there, they're straight in. So, which is a great model for the industry, because we don't lose them back to the university for a year and then, risk them not coming back after that. Because again, we're putting an investment into them for a year, spending the whole year with us. And obviously, they have a salary, this isn't a sort of, a free model, we're paying them and everything else, and we're helping with accommodation and all sorts. However, off the back of last year when we were talking about this, we've always had a number of our placement students from Staffordshire University, and we were due to have another 2 go back to university to finish their studies. And with that dialogue and that discourse with the university, and a big thank you to sort of Bobby, who sort of runs that course with Davin, Stu Butler, and Sean Reeves, we managed to design a part-time course for their final year. So they'll be with us, half the week, and with the university for half the week. So they'll be a full-time employee as a part-time basis. So we don't lose them straight back to their course, and they're still a member of that team. They're still productive, and that. Again, he's coming off the back of what we did with GamesEd and the discourse last year, how we can solve that problem without sort of completely throwing everything up in the air with doing placements at the end and the headaches that would invoke.
Lara, how would you see a way to get more real world experience for more than just a tiny number of the best of the students?
Yeah, well, the reason why we came last year was because we had just completed the Games Fusion project, which was the research project funded by the Office for Students. And what worked about that project was we had about 20 students, and we, Rosie Ball at Chucklefish and Mary Claire Eisman at Women in Games were very generous with their time, and came in to that group of students and had them work on a industry project that was led by Chris Lothorpe, to be in an agile Scrum model, so that they were working, trying to work their first opportunity as in a studio environment, even though it was within the educational establishment. But by having the industry come in, they were able to and give commentary on the work as it went on, and give feedback from a professional perspective, not from an academic perspective. We were able to, in some ways, give a much more professional experience to a larger group of students rather than sending individual students out on placement. And a relatively significant number of those students went on and got hired right away off their graduation show. So they ended up making the best games. They ended up getting the best jobs, right away. And that was really impressive. And it was a different model. And I think that would, it's not that we set that model up thinking this would be the best way forward, but it did seem to have better results for a larger number of students.
Yeah, so it's a really interesting way of doing it. So instead of sending students to studios, you're almost saying you're taking you're asking for a little bit more investment in time from the studios themselves, of some of their people, to come into a very specific, a very agile environment, and then teach a little. I mean, how much of a commitment was that from industry?
It actually wasn't that much. It was the setting of the briefs, and then we supplied the academics with the industry experience that was necessary to set up a model studio situation. So these are people who came from industry who knew what they were doing. They set up the model, and then Rosie would come in maybe during the sprints, maybe once per sprint, and I think we did 5 or 6 sprints. You know, just to give commentary, you know, as the client, basically, and to give that professional feedback, which is very different from the feedback students generally get from academics. It just, I think it gave them their first taste of what it might be like in the real world. And I think it just prepared them better.
And from, I presume, from industry point of view, they're also getting to see up close and personal a cohort of talented young students, from whom they might be recommending to the recruitment department, you should have a look at that. This person.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
I mean, I think it feels like there's a model there. I mean, the only thing I'll say is that both of the examples that you've given, Adrian and Lara, have been ones that have won some funding from somewhere in order to do something very different. Quite a lot of funding in Adrian's case.
Yeah.
And I mean, obviously there are lots of pots of funding like AHRC that are around, but it takes a long time, a lot of fundraising to go and attack those and eventually win those. Sounds like that model works. Adrian, you were going to come in.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the key thing, it's always about finding win-win situations, isn't it? I know we've got some questions in the sidebar. I don't know if we're allowed to answer them or just address.
I was going to ask those. Please,
yeah, sorry, jump ahead to it then. But it's do we feel like teaching staff, so as sort of senior leaders within the university, then do we feel like teaching staff are too busy doing things like, you know, recruitment clearing, addressing KPIs, filling out spreadsheets, all this sort of stuff? Well, yeah, there is an endless amount of that to do, but I think everybody's incredibly busy, and I've never met a single academic, I've never met a single member of staff in the university who actually is too busy or doesn't have the desire, rather, to meaningfully get involved with someone who's working in the area that they love. So if we take games staff generally, not just at Portsmouth, but at any higher education or further education institution, they are going to be incredibly passionate about what they do. And I think it is that thing about meaningful relationships. So if our relationship with industry is just to provide you with awesome graduates, well, that's not meaningful, is it, for us? We want to kind of help you get something out of your interaction with us. And that great project that you were just describing, Lara, you know, if we have someone from a studio come into the university and do a mini project, as with all the final year students at Portsmouth, they all do a project using producers, and they mock it up, and you have industry come in and kind of feed into it. We know that they get something out of it because it gives them a buzz. It changes their working day and it re-enthuses them, and they get a little bit of what we get all the time, which is the light bulb, seeing the light bulb moment go off in students and helping to inspire them with a thirst for knowledge. So that's where it works really, really well. I think whether or not academics feel like they're too busy doing recruitment clearing or addressing KPIs, everyone in my school will kind of be sick of me saying this, but this is our mindset. Maybe we need to spend less time addressing KPIs and filling out a spreadsheet about this and get back into the place that we love, because that's where we're going to be most efficient, most passionate, and where it's going to work best. So simple.
Thank you. Lara.
Well, I think from the funding point of view, I think one of the things that we need to think about, and I think, you know, Nick talking about that final year as opposed to being a sandwich year being the end year, I think that we as educators need to look at different models, because the point of that Office for Students grant wasn't just to do that project, but was to help re-envision and redesign the games curriculum to be more industry appropriate. And I think that if we were to design curriculum so that our foundational teaching intersected with industry in a more direct way, not just in a skills way, but in an, a different, more involved way that we might be able to get around some of these problems.
Yeah.
Nick,
Yeah.
sorry, a final thought from you.
Yeah, it's just off the back of that. If you look at those placement years, they finish a year with us, they've ended in 3 years. They're probably at a much better place than someone who's just done 3 years at university, having done a third of their course with us as a professional sort of placement. And it almost feels unfair that they can't just call it a day then and get a degree classification and then start their career as soon as possible and start paying back the student debt and earning a good salary.
Great. Well, I need to be as strict on my moderated sessions as I have been on other people's. So we're going to take another screen break, and that is the last of our streams today, is in splitting our delegates into two. And we're going to come back and hear about games educational policy from two representatives of the trade bodies, moderated by Pete Howell from Portsmouth University. So thank you very much to our panelists for a really interesting discussion. I'm a lot clearer on the main issues now. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.